Working with Git and GitHub can be hard topics to swallow when you started out with development. And in this video, I'm going to show you the really basic stuff on how to create a branch and how to create a remote repository and how to work on that branch to make some changes in your code and how to push it to your remote repository. So stay tuned. I'm going to use my application here that I use for my React Essentials course. So I'm going to create the repository for this one first at GitHub, and then we're going to use this application to create some branches and work on the branches and how we commit stuff, and then I'm going to show how you push it to the remote repository. So let's start off in GitHub. So I'm going to create a new repository. So I click the new button and then I name it React-Git maybe or something, and then you can give it a description. This is the finished React Essentials app, like this. We're going to create it as a public. And then we don't need to add any README file or anything here. We can add a git ignore if we want to ignore some stuff here. And in this case, I probably want to do that because I have an API key for the movie database API that I use in this application. But I'm going to create the git ignore file in the local repository. So we don't need to do anything here. So we just create the repository. And then they give you a little bit of instruction here on how you should do it. Now I can see here, this was called master before. They called the branch main instead of master now. And I read about this. They're going to transition over to call it main instead. So that's why you don't see master here if you used to see the branch master. It's called main now instead. And this is instructions if you don't already have any code. So we're going to do the git init in our code, but we don't need to add a README and stuff like that. Okay, so let's go back to the console, and I have my local application in this folder. So make sure that you're inside a folder where you have your application. And the first thing we have to do here is to init this as a Git repository. And we can use the command git init. And you can see that it tells us that it actually created a Git repository now when we run that command. This command prompt changed here, and that's because I set it up to show me the Git status. In this case, it's a question mark, so I can type in git status to see the status of Git. And you can see that we have a lot of files here that are red in this case in my console. And these haven't been added or committed or staged as they should be. So this is what they do here in this little instruction here. They assume that you only have a file that's called README that you want to add. In our case, we want to add all the files. But as you can see here, it tells us that we also have this node modules folder and we have the .env file. We don't want to push these files to the remote repository. So that's why we have to create what's called a git ignore file. And I'm going to do that from my code editor, actually. You could also do it in the terminal, but I like to do it inside of here. So this is the code for this application. You can see my .env file, and you can also see the node modules folder. So here in the root, I create a new file that I call .git ignore, like this. Yeah, it tells me something here. Yeah, it actually asks me if I want to add the node modules to my git ignore. And that's exactly what I want to do. I don't want to include the node modules in my Git repository when I push it to the remote one. So that's the node modules. And then I also don't want to include the .env file because there I have my API key. So I type it in like this. So I save this file, and you can also see that these are grayed out now, so they are not going to be included. So that's why they're grayed out, and the other ones are green. So if I go back to my terminal, I can clear it, and then I type in git status. You can see that the .env and the node module isn't here. So we can add all these files, or actually this one is a file that is created on Mac. We can actually add this one to the git ignore also. And of course, you can do some comments here also if you want to do that. Save the file, go back to the terminal, type in git status, and you can see that that one is ignored. So now we can add all these files, and instead of adding just the README files from the instructions on GitHub, we're going to type in git add and a dot. And this will add all the files, and you can see that it changed to a plus. So if I type in git status again, you can see that they are green now. And that means that they are ready to be committed. In this case, we want to commit all the files now because we want to push this application to the remote repository. So I type in git commit, And -m, that means that we want to create a message, and we have quotes. This is the first commit, or something else if you want to type in that. And I press enter, and now you can see that it's on master. That's the master branch. And we can also check out the branches. So git branch, you can see that we only have one branch that's called master now. So still, this one creates the master by default, but here on GitHub, it tells us that it wants to be called main. So you can do whatever you want here. You can rename the branch to main if you want to do that. I'm not going to do that because I think that to call it master is still what you call a standard. This is fairly new. So what we've done here, we've added the files and we committed it, and we have the branch already. And then we need to add our local repository to this that we created here, this remote repository. And you do that by this row that they give you here, git remote add, and then you have origin. That's the remote repository that we have at the origin. And then they give you the exact path here to that remote repository. So I'm going to copy this one, go back to my terminal. I clear it again just for you guys to see it better. I paste it in. So what I do here is to run git and the command that's called remote, add an origin, and this will hook it up to this remote repository here that we created before. So now this one is hooked up to the repository. I pressed enter here. That hooked it up to that remote repository, and that means that we can push this one, because if we look here now, react-git, you can see that we don't have any files here now. So we don't have any code. It's empty. So we need to push this application to this remote repository. And you do that with the git push command. So I type in git push, and then I flag it with -u, and this will make this branch the upstream, as they call it. So you don't need to type in git push origin master all the time. You can just type in git push. So origin and master. So this means that I take this branch that I have here, the master, and I push it to the remote repository on the origin, and it's named master there also. So I press enter, and you can see that it starts working now. And hopefully we have our application here. So I reload this repository, and you can see that we have all the code here. So that's super great. It worked. We have this application both in our local repository and in our remote repository here on GitHub. I'm going to clear it again. You can see that I'm on the master here. Let's say that you want to do some changes to this application. So we want to create another branch. You shouldn't work on the master, of course, because master is kind of the production application in this case. So you don't want to do any changes there. Instead, we create a new branch and we work on this branch instead. So by typing in git checkout -b, it means that we do this in one go. I create a new branch and I also check out the branch. When you check out the branch, it essentially means that you navigate inside of that branch. It's kind of when you change the directory into another folder. So with git, we use checkout. So git checkout -b, and then we can name the new branch. So we can name it some cool feature. Some cool feature. And then I press enter. And you can see that it tells me here in my console now, and this may not look the same in your console because this is something that I set up. So it will show the current branch I'm on. So you can set that up in your terminal probably if you want to do that also. So it tells me that I'm on the some cool feature branch. And I can also bring up all the branches with git branch. I can see that I have this new branch here, and this means that I'm on this branch, and I also have the master branch. So if I go inside of my code editor now, you can see down below here, it tells me that I'm on this some cool feature branch. So if I click here, I also have the master branch. And then it also tells me that I have an origin /master, and that's the remote branch. In my case, I want to work on some cool feature branch. And for example, if I change something inside of source components and the home file, maybe, yeah, I can change something here. If we take a look at the application, you can see that this one, for example, tells me popular movies. Maybe I want to change this one. It's down below here somewhere. Yeah. I can change this to really popular movies and I save it. And then you can see here in Visual Studio Code, this one gives me a 1. So if I click this, you can see that I made one change. So you can create a commit here. You can do all of this inside of Visual Studio Code, but I want to show you how to do it in the console. So if you click this one here, you will commit it. You enter your commit message here, and you can commit it inside of VS Code without ever leaving Visual Studio Code. But I'm going to go back to my terminal. I'm going to clear it again. And you can see that now I have this exclamation mark here. And that tells me that I have made some changes. So yet again, I type in git status. And you can see it tells me that I modified something in the home.js file. So that's fine. I know that I modified something that I want to commit. So then I type in git add, and I use the dot. In this case, we only had one file, so you could specify the exact file name here. But it's easy to just use git add and a dot. I do that all the time if there isn't some specific files that I don't want to commit. And now it shows me the plus sign here, and that means that I'm ready to commit it. I can type in git status again. So this one is green. I have added it, so I can commit it. So I type in git commit -m, and I give it the commit message. And in this case, I change something in the home. Change header in the home component, like this. And now it shows nothing here. So that means I've committed it. It's working, hopefully. So if I type in npm start and start up the application again, yeah, you can see that it tells me really popular movies. So the changes are there. But I only have the changes locally. So I want to push them to the remote repository also. And I also only have them on this branch. So first I want to merge it into master, and then I want to push it to the remote repository. When you work with a client, for example, you are going to push this branch, and then you create something that's called a pull request. And they will look at the pull request, and they have to authorize it before they merge it into master. But that's not something that I'm going to do in this video, because I think that another story in this video, I just want to show you the really, really basic stuff to get you going with Git and how to create a remote repository and push to it. So if we check here again, Git branch, we have 2 branches. I'm going to check out the master, Git checkout master. And this means that I move back to the master branch, and you can see that I'm on the master now. And now I want to merge in those changes that I created in this some cool feature branch. So I can do that with a command git merge, and then I type in the name of the branch. So git merge some-cool-feature. And you can see that in this case it worked, and we have 1 insertion and 1 deletion. So you can also see that it changed here. It's showing me an up arrow here, and that means that I haven't pushed it to my remote repository. I want to push this to the remote repository, so I can do that with the git command git push. And as we specify this one as the upstream with -u when we initialize this repository, we don't need to type in git push origin master. We can now just type git push, and it will know that we want to push it to the origin master. So I press enter. And you can see that it pushed all the stuff to the remote repository. So if I move back to the Git repository, and we can reload it, and I can check out the file here in the src, the components, and it was the home component that I changed. You can see that it says really popular movies here. So we have successfully pushed this change to the remote repository. So this is the really basic stuff on how you work with Git and how you do some changes locally, and then how you push it to the remote repository. The next step after this is to learn how to create pull requests and how to work in a team, how you push different branches, and how you do some code reviews to look at other people's code. And then in the end, you merge those changes from the pull request into the master. But this should get you going. This is the very basic Git stuff you need to know to get started working with Git. Hope seeing you in another video, and please subscribe to my channel if you like my code tutorials.